You were born under candlelight. Not the romantic, flickering kind that bathes lovers in gold, no. The smoky, sputtering tallow kind that made everything smell faintly of wet dog and rendered shadows more terrifying than the things that cast them. And you were born screaming, not because of some poetic wail of new life, but because being the son of a Viking king was a cursed affair from the start. Your mother bled into the furs, while the midwife muttered half blessings, half apologies. If she lived, you might have a cold woman's kiss on your brow and nothing more. If she died, well, that was one less political asset for your father to worry about. Either way, your swaddling cloth was the bloodied skin of a lamb sacrificed for your arrival, and honestly, it was probably the cleanest thing in the room. The seer was there too, naturally. Old era of the mist eyes, hunched like a knotted root, squinted into your future with clouded pupils, and declared cryptically, of course, that you would either bring great glory to your line or doom it to ruin. Vikings loved a 50/50th prophecy. It gave everyone permission to fear you just enough to keep their knives sharp. You see, in Viking culture, being born royal didn't mean you'd one day rule with grace and wisdom. It meant you were valuable, not lovable, not safe, just ... usable ... Your earliest memories are tinged with frostbite and humiliation. Being the son of a king meant you were never just a child. You were a little political minicart rolling toward explosive expectations. Before you could speak, you were expected to listen closely, especially to threats hidden in lullabies. Before you could walk, you were wrapped in wolf fur and placed beside warriors during feasts, a reminder to them and to yourself. This tiny meat sack is going to matter. Or else, no toys. No lullabies. No naps without 3 people staring at you to make sure you weren't placed by a changeling. Or worse, poisoned when the other village children splashed in icy streams, throwing sticks and shrieking at fish. You are being shown how to flay them. Not the fish, the enemies. Which enemies? All of them. That was the lesson. At 4, you were gifted your first blade. Not a toy. A real, rust-flecked, bone-handled dagger, sharp enough to gut a squirrel or a sibling, depending on which one crossed. You first. Your father nodded solemnly as you unwrapped it, proud that his heir now had a weapon, and a new way to disappoint him. By 5, you were fighting. And by fighting, we mean being knocked flat by an older cousin while elders debated whether your broken nose would grow back straight. It didn single quotes T. Life in a Viking royal household wasn't a storybook affair. The longhouse reeked of ambition and old mead. The walls whispered. Every servant was someone's nephew. Every skald was someone's spy. And every meal could be your last if you insulted the wrong uncle. You weren't raised by parents. You were curated by politics. Mother, if she survived, was distant literally. Sent back to her people once her wound proved itself, or cloistered in a side hall with her embroidery and grief. Father, he was present the way a thunderstorm is loud, unpredictable, impossible to ignore, and always reminding you that someday you would need to be the storm. No pressure. And then there were your siblings. Let's talk about them. Being the son of a Viking king didn't mean being the son. Succession wasn't a straight line. It was a battlefield shaped like a family tree. That meant you had brothers. Lots of them. Maybe even a half-dozen, all with varying degrees of legitimacy, charm, and knife-holding ability. Some were older, already hard-eyed, and eager to prove your skull made a better drinking vessel than your crown. Some were younger, watching you with quiet calculation and learning which poisons made stew taste sweet. Every feast was a competition. Who drank with father? Who was ignored? Who got to sit near the fire? And who was left in the draft? A cold bench was a cold omen. And you? You learned early that love was not given. It was gambled for. No one rooted for you to succeed. Not really. The warriors liked you weak. It meant job security. The skalds liked you tragic. It made for better. Stories. The priests liked you penitent, because a broken prince makes a better convert. And your father? He liked you tough, but not too tough. Strong enough to fight, but never strong enough to challenge him. At age 10, you watched a cousin's ear get cut off for making a joke about the king's limp. You laughed. They saw you. That cousin later fell into a frozen river. You were taught then that laughing is only for victors and corpses. At 11, you fell in love with a thrall girl who brought you honey in secret. You kissed her behind the goat pen. She vanished the next day. When you asked, the steward only said, she was distracting the future. The future, of course, was you. So what was your future? To be tested. Every hunt, every raid, every insult. From a visiting Jarl's son was a silent exam. Could you endure pain without crying? Could you deliver a killing blow without flinching? Could you survive this winter? Could you survive next winter? Could you survive your brother? By your 12th winter, you'd already buried 2 dogs, 1 guard, and your sense of safety. You began to understand that royalty wasn't a right, it was a gamble. One you were forced to play every day, but you weren't nurtured. You were home. And so you stared into the hearth one night, your lips cracked from cold, your fingers calloused from swordplay, your future so heavy it bent your spine, and you wondered, would it have been better to be born a fisherman's son? 2. Row out each morning into the fog, smelling only of salt and salmon, fearing only the sea? But no, you were royal. And royalty in the Viking Age meant living a life sharpened like a blade, useful, dangerous, and always one slip away from being plunged into the dark. They didn't teach you to read. They taught you to listen, not to lullabies or bedtime tales. Those were for the peasants, the sons of blacksmiths and fishermen, the ones whose mistakes wouldn't start wars. No, your bedtime was for silence. The kind that pressed in around you like wet wool, broken only by the crackling of the hearth or the low mutter of drunk uncles plotting succession. Because when you're the son of a Viking king, the world doesn't wait for you to grow up. It hands you a spear and watches to see if you stab yourself or someone else. Your education began with pain. Specifically, learning how not to show it. At 6, you were made to place your hand near fire until your eyes watered. If you cried, you were called weak. If you didn't, you were called promising. Either way, the back of your hand bore the blistered medal of manhood. The training yard was your schoolyard, and your textbooks were wooden swords, ice patches, and older cousins who had already killed their first boar. You learned quickly that sparring wasn't just about strength, it was about performance. Losing a fight gracefully meant you were clever. Winning it too brutally, that made you a threat. Your tutor, if you could call him that, was an old warrior named Skjalg, whose left eye had long since been replaced with a polished stone, and whose breath permanently smelled of fermented fish and regret. His methods were less Socratic, more concussive. Pain is the tutor of princes, he said once, after you'd cracked a rib. Pay attention, boy. It doesn't teach twice. You remembered that. Because that night, breathing felt like drowning. You were expected to master 5 things by age 10. Swordplay, poetry, sailing, negotiation, and looking terrifying even when you were exhausted. Most boys mastered 1. You, being royal, were expected to master all. Poetry, strangely, was the most dangerous. Viking culture prized words. A prince who couldn't speak well was like a blade with no edge. So they made you memorize the sagas stories of gods, monsters, and men with fates worse than death. Recite them wrong? Laughter. Recite them too well? Jealousy. Either could kill you. And then there were the runes. You weren't supposed to learn them, not officially. Reading was for scribes and priests. But you were curious, and curiosity was a sin among kings' sons. One night, you scratched your name into a timber beam in secret. A week later, that same beam was burned, accidentally, during firewood gathering. No one asked how. No one looked at you. But that night, a goat's head was left at the foot of your sleeping bench. The message was clear. Secrets are dangerous, especially when you know them. Sailing was next. Not the peaceful gliding across glassy lakes that bards sing about, but brutal. Winter voyages where the wind flayed your skin, and the sea slapped you like an angry god. You were made to row. Not because they needed your strength, but because you needed their scorn. Salt in your eyes, calluses on your palms, and vomit frozen to your beard by nightfall. This, they told you, was the sea's gift? Humility. But it wasn't humility you learned. It was insignificance. Out there, in the black between waves, even. A prince could drown like a dog. The thing about being the son of a king is this: you are always either being watched or forgotten. Both were dangerous. If you were watched too closely, you became a threat. If forgotten, you became irrelevant. So you learned the art of in-betweenness. You laughed just loudly enough, fought just fiercely enough, failed just believably enough. When your half-brother Sigtryg began training with live blades at age 9, everyone said he was brave. When you asked to do the same, they said you were reckless. So you bided your time. Practiced at night, carved sword hilts into your bed frame, shadowboxed with TORCHLIGHT. One day, you would show them, but not yet, was a girl named Rana, the blacksmith's niece. Hair like soot, voice like honey warmed over a fire. She caught you once, bleeding in the forest after a failed boar hunt, said nothing, just tore her apron, wrapped your thigh, and left. You loved her. Which is why, when you overheard your father planning to wed her to a rival chieftain as part of a peace offering, you said nothing, just watched her go, eyes wide, silent, accepting. That was the second lesson they never taught you in words. King's sons do not get to keep what they love. They trade it. For peace, for power, for less war than last season. At night, you practiced your father's frown in the reflection of the blackened cauldron. You adjusted your posture, made your voice deeper, tried to sound like someone who didn't care, because to survive. Here, in the smoky breath of kings and killers, you had to become something. Else. A shadow in your own skin. Asterisk. By 13, your nightmares had changed. You no longer dreamed of wolves or sea serpents. You dreamed of chairs. Not just any chair, a high seat. The throne of your father. Carved from ashwood, polished by generations of sweat, moan, and spilt mead. It loomed not like an object, but a presence. Always visible from the far end of the longhouse, even in smoke and shadow. A throne shaped less by design than by the weight of all the backs that had broken to keep it standing. And one day, they told you, it would be yours. Lucky you. The throne wasn't just a seat. It was a sentence. To sit on it meant power. But power in Viking lands wasn't about crowns or ermine robes. It was responsibility with a body count. It meant debts, vengeance, alliances, and a never-ending list of names men who would smile at you with blades hidden under their cloaks. You wouldn't rule alone. No one ever did. You'd have advisors. You'd have elders. You'd have a council of graying men who had seen too many winters and didn't trust boys who hadn't killed someone in single combat yet. Even as a teen, you knew that they would be watching, measuring you, whispering in corners with cups half full and eyes half closed. The day you sat in that chair would be the day you officially became their favorite threat. And what of your father, King Hrothgar, known across the fjords as the Steel beard, not for his iron discipline, but because he literally had metal rings braided into his beard. A walking emblem of aggression and decorative excess. He didn't teach you to lead. He taught you to endure. He never said, "You'll make a great king." Instead, he said things like, "Your enemies don't care what you meant." Or, "Mercy is for the second-born." Or, "Trust is a privilege you give your shield, not people." Each sentence felt like a bruise. Some never faded. One evening, the longhouse was filled with smoke and screams. Your cousin Halstein had returned from raiding. In the east missing a hand, but carrying a bag of foreign coins and a new tattoo that no one could read. He insulted the Jarl of Vestfold over the thickness of his ale. 3 men died. A table burned. Your father laughed. You, however, had to help carry the corpses to the ice pits behind the stables. Your arms trembled. Your boots slipped in blood-mud. This was your inheritance. Glory soaked in intestines. Public punishments were part of your curriculum. When the thrall boy Hakon was caught stealing dried fish, they didn't just beat him. They tied him to the village post and let children throw pebbles at him for 3 days. You were expected to watch. And when he collapsed, your father handed you the knife. Teach him what justice means. You looked at Hakon, lips cracked, eyes swollen shut, still clutching his stomach in hunger. You dropped the blade. Your father stared at you. Not in anger, in disappointment. Which, somehow, was worse. The next morning, Hakon was gone. No one said where. You began to understand what ruling meant. It wasn't about strength. It was about cruelty. Packaged. The ability to appear compassionate when your heart was ice. The art of making people obey without ever raising your voice. The elegance of veiled threats wrapped in favors. By 15, you could offer a handshake with one hand and plan a marriage alliance with the other. You knew when to nod, when to flinch, when to laugh too loudly at jokes. Meant to test your loyalty. It was a performance. Constant, exhausting. You never left the stage. One winter, a rival chieftain's son visited. Tall, blonde, too confident. During the feast, he tossed you a bone and sighed, "Here, pup, chew on your place." The room froze. You didn't blink. You simply smiled, stood up. And bit the bone. Loudly. The room laughed. So did your father. So did the chieftain. But later, alone in the back room, your father grabbed your jaw and hissed, "Never forget, boy. A wolf doesn't bite bones. He breaks necks." You didn't sleep. That night, you sharpened your dagger instead. You weren't allowed to grieve. When your mother died from illness, they said, though the whispers spoke of poison, you weren't permitted tears. Not at the pyre. Not in the longhouse. Not in the frost-covered woods where you buried her beads beneath a tree. She used to sit under. Grief was weakness. And you were your father's heir. So you learned the third great lesson of royalty. Silence is survival. You burned everything that hurt and kept the ashes inside. It began with a wolf pelt and a lie. You were 16. They told you it was a rite of passage. At every royal son before you had done it. That it was tradition. Sacred. Honorable. They did not tell you it was a test. They never told you anything. You were awoken before dawn, shoved into cold boots, handed a bundle of dried meat, and marched into the forest by 4 silent men in cloaks. No words, no fire, no warmth, but your own breath coiling in the air, like fog searching for an escape. They led you through snow and silence, past the boundary stones, past the burial mounds, into the deep forest where the sun rarely touched the ground. There, they left you. No sword, no shield. Just a dagger and a whisper. Return by sunset, or don't return at all. And they vanished. At first, you thought it was about survival. You'd hunted before. You knew how to snare a hare, to trace elk tracks, to distinguish a game trail from a wolf's den. You built a fire, ate your meat, waited by mid-afternoon. The cold had sunk into your bones like regret. Then you heard the howl, not far, alone. You rose, blade in hand, and followed it, because that's what a story demands, right? The boy must face the beast. You found the wolf before it found you. It was young, hungry, eyes like frozen lakes. It stared at you across a clearing dusted with snow, its breath clouding in bursts. You raised the dagger, and then it limped, its paw mangled. Trapped once, broken? It didn't attack. It whimpered. You lowered the blade and sat. You stayed like that for hours, watching each other. Two sons of winter. Both abandoned, both injured in ways that would never show in bone. When you finally stood to leave, it didn't run. It followed. It trusted you. You returned to the village at dusk. You expected applause, or at least a nod. Instead, your father looked past you to the wolf at your heels, and he frowned. You didn't kill it. I didn't need to. He stepped closer, hand on his sword. A king kills. Mercy is for shepherds. And that was when you saw it. The trick. This wasn't a test of survival. It was a test of obedience. They didn't want you to live. Wanted you to obey. To do the hard thing. The cruel thing. Even when it wasn't necessary. Especially then. You refused. And so, they killed the wolf. In front of you. No blade. Just stones. A lesson. You didn't cry. You didn't speak. You just watched. Father waited for you to break. But you didn't. You learned a fourth lesson instead. Vengeance sleeps. But it never dies. Later that winter, the Skalds composed a new saga about you. It said you had faced down a pack of wolves and returned with their fangs. It was a lie, but a useful one. From then on, people looked at you differently. The boys you'd trained with averted their eyes. The Jarls sent their daughters with careful smiles and folded hands. The old warriors whispered less, watched more. You had not passed the test in the way they wanted, but you had survived it. And survival was currency. You began to be invited to war councils, not to speak, of course, but to listen. You learned how revenge was mapped, how tribute was calculated, how oaths were twisted. You learned that alliances were brokered not in mead halls, but in back rooms thick with grease and grudge. And you learned that the greatest power a Viking king held was knowing whose death would cause the least trouble. One night, as the snow beat sideways against the longhouse, your father called you to the hearth. He didn't look at you, just threw a sword into the fire and said, "Fish or drown, boy." You waited. Then pulled it out with your bare hands. The flesh hissed. The stink of burning filled your nose. You didn't scream. He nodded once and said nothing else. That was your coronation. Not in name, but in fear. Asterisk. You weren't alone. Unfortunately. You had brothers. Half-brothers mostly. Some born of wedlock. Others from the drunken fog of raids and favors. The kind of siblings who smiled with their mouths, but never their eyes. The kind who would pour you mead with one hand and test your armor, scenes with the other. The first thing you learned about brothers in a Viking royal household? They weren't siblings. They were rivals in training. At feasts. They sat close, but never beside you. Not out of respect, out of calculation. Everything was a game. Who got the best cut of meat? Who laughed first at the king's jokes? Who left the hall last and who followed them out? You once saw your older brother Aslak drop something into your cup. You didn't drink it. You watched as your youngest brother, Sigbjorn, picked it up instead. He was dead by morning. They said it was the cold. That it was not the cold. Your father did nothing, not even a shrug. He merely grunted and said, The gods. Choose who is strong. That was Viking justice in royal bloodlines. Survival was the only verdict that mattered. There were moments brief, flickering, when you thought maybe, just maybe, there was some bond between you. Once, you and your brother, Sten, hunted together. You cornered a bear. He let you take the first blow. You missed. He did single quotes T. He dragged it back to the village and told everyone you killed it. Later that night, he tried to strangle you in your sleep with a bowstring. You woke gasping, stared into his eyes, and saw something like apology, but not regret. Tension wasn't just emotional. It was architectural. The longhouse itself was a battlefield. Your sleeping platform next to the hearth meant warmth and proximity to the head of the family. Sten's place moved closer each month. Aslak built a curtain around his spot, claiming it was for privacy. Everyone knew it was to hide weapons. And Thorleik, the quiet one, just stopped sleeping inside altogether. Took to the roof, like a raven watching a battlefield that hadn't happened yet. You learned to sleep with your back to a wall, one hand on your blade, the other under your pillow. The women noticed not just the concubines, especially the concubines. They watched everything, listened even harder, because they knew that whichever son survived would soon be king, and kings remember favors, or insults. Then came the tests, not from the elders, not from your father, from each other. Sten challenged you to a duel for practice. You knew better, but said yes anyway. It lasted 12 minutes, 7 bruises, and 1 cracked collarbone. You lost, but smiled through the blood and said, "Good practice." He never challenged you again, because your smile scared him. They tested you with lies, rumors, planted like seeds. One claimed you'd slept with a thrall pregnant with Aslak's child. Another said you were planning to run to the Christian side. Another said you were cursed touched by Loki. None of them stuck, because you said nothing. Silence, you learned, was the sharpest sword. It cut without being seen. Then came the inheritance, not of land, of followers. In Viking culture, loyalty wasn't inherited, it was earned. And the people began to talk. The blacksmith gave you a better blade. The steward offered you his ear, even. The seer woman, Era of the Mist Eyes, touched your shoulder once during a feast and said, "He watches you, child." You asked to, she said, "All of them." That winter, Sten disappeared. They found his body in the woods, half-eaten by wolves, dagger still clenched in his hand. You said nothing. Your father said less. Aslak said too much. The wolves have their king. You nodded. Later that night, you found your dagger missing from under your pillow. It returned the next morning, soaked in pine. Sap. Still warm. And now there were 2. Your father didn't die in battle. He didn't fall on a spear. He wasn't swallowed by the sea. He didn't vanish into the mist on a raid, or explode in a blaze of glory as the Scalds would have liked. He choked on a piece of undercooked venison. That was it. The most feared warlord in the northern fjords, the man who drank from the skull of his enemies and strangled a bear with his cloak, died making a sound like a drowning pig. His death stunk of panic and meat grease, and the only blood spilled was from a nosebleed during the frantic attempt to slap it out of him. You were there. Watching. You didn't move. Neither did Aslak. After, the silence in the longhouse was suffocating. No one dared speak. No one cried. His body was laid out, that night limbs straightened, beard combed, weapons arranged just so. The death rites began. The priests muttered their verses. The Scalds prepared their verses. And you? You stood at the back, because this was not grief. It was strategy. Viking succession was not inheritance. It was blood sport dressed in tradition. There was no crown. There was claim. And now that the king was dead, You and Aslak were the final contenders. No votes. No formal duel. No written will. Only whispers. And steel. The day after the body burned, Aslak challenged you. Not with words, with guests. He held a feast, invited every jarl within sailing distance, gave them gifts, fur, wine, silverwork, daughters. He made speeches, spoke of unity, legacy, the strength of brothers. And when he raised his cup to toast your name, he called you the Silent One. A compliment and a warning. You didn't throw your own feast. You didn't need to. You walked to the blacksmith the next morning and returned with the broken edge of your father's sword reforged, reshaped, scorched black. You carried it everywhere. Let them. Whisper. Let them see. A boy who forges a blade from his father's ruin is not one to be underestimated. And then came the vote. Not democratic. Not official. But real. Every family, every house, every farmstead had to choose Aslak's charm or your shadow. You visited each one, walking in with nothing but your sword and your silence. You asked for no allegiance. You listened. They spoke. Remembered. The wolf, the feast, dagger. The silence. The night before the formal gathering, Aslak made his final move. He tried to burn the longhouse. His plan was elegant. Fire set in 3 places. Doors barred. Blame shifted to raiders. But the thrall boy he bribed told you instead. And so, when the flames started, you were already outside, watching the roof catch, the smoke rise. The heat warped the beams your ancestors carved with gods and monsters. You watched it burn. Didn't stop it. Didn't scream. Didn't cry. In the morning, you walked into the ashes barefoot. No shirt. No cloak. No armor. Just soot, smoke, and your father's broken blade at your side. You picked up one of the scorched shields, stuck it into the ground, and stood beside it. Aslak arrived late. Clean, cloaked, crownless. They saw the difference. And they chose. You didn't kill Aslak that day. He fled, which meant you'd spend the next year hearing rumors of rebellion, of ambushes, of sightings near the coast. But you weren't afraid. You were already mourning. Because becoming king wasn't a triumph. It was a subtraction. Every day after the throne was yours, you had a little less of yourself. A little more steel. Asterisk. No. One tells you how much a throne actually weighs. Not the wood. Not the wolf pelts or the iron nails holding it together. The weight is what settles into your spine. The moment your name is spoken aloud as King. It begins as a cold breath behind your neck, then a tightness in your ribs, and eventually it becomes part of your bones. You took the throne with no ceremony. No horns. No golden crowns. Just a burned longhouse, a scorched hall of ghosts, and a silence so deep it rang in your ears. You sat down, finally, for the first time, in that high seat where your father once barked orders and broke men with laughter. And you understood something crucial. Power isn't given. It's tolerated. Your first decree was to rebuild the longhouse. Exactly as it was. Beam for beam. Carving for carving. No additions. Let them see. You didn't come to remake the world. You came to remind it. But being king didn't mean you ruled. Not yet. Now came the visits. The envoys from the islands. The jarls from the valleys. The cousins with claims wrapped in flattery. They came with gifts. They came with lies. They came with smiles and swords and questions with 2 meanings. Will you continue your father's alliances? Will you lower tribute for winter-poor villages? Will you marry my daughter? Always with the daughters. You began to see them not as people, but as propositions with hair and hopeful eyes. You picked none. Instead, you rode, alone, across the land. You slept in huts and listened by hearths. You ate salted cod and heard whispered prayers, worries, Gossip. You learned what your father never knew. People speak truth when they forget the king is listening. They feared you. Yes, but they were also watching, waiting, hoping you'd rule differently. You returned to the hall and made no proclamations. You called no feast. You sent no letters. Instead, you invited the old crone EYR, Miss Eyes. She arrived in a cloak that stank of herbs and age, and she asked you one question. Do you know whose bones hold this hall upright? You said yes, and make sure they rest easy. You began your reign not with glory, but with repair. You fixed roads, rebuilt roofs. Sent timber to the fishing villages your father ignored. When war-hungry jarls grumbled that you'd gone soft, you didn't argue. You simply reminded them that fields feed armies better than poems, but peace breeds dissent faster than war. And you had enemies now, more than ever. You found the first spy in the grain cellar. Dead. Choked on the very poison he was meant to slip into your mead. You found the second in the kitchen, your food taster, who had already eaten your portion. You spared his life because he chose to eat it, and loyalty like that is worth more than gold. You learned to watch for signs. A cloak out of place, a horse unsaddled, a name spoken to, carefully. And in those quiet months, you discovered the final truth of kingship. You didn't rise to the throne. You survived your way there. The oddest part of ruling? The quiet. You thought it would be battle cries, horns, the clash of iron on shield. Instead, it was murmurs, soft tones behind curtains. Long pauses between questions. Letters written with words that meant something else entirely. Peace didn't feel like safety. It felt like walking a frozen lake with wolves beneath. You discovered the strange reality of being king. People rarely say what they want. They say what they think you want to hear. They bow lower, laugh too long, ask for favors wrapped in parables, and dead fish. Every visit, every feast, every handshake was a potential ambush. The jarls sent gifts. A gold-inlaid drinking horn from Ulf the Fat-Laced with tracking powder. A carved amber idol from Yrsa the Widow, hollowed out and filled with whispered spells. Maiden from the coast, whose name meant dagger, in a dialect you weren't supposed to understand. You sent the horn back with a note. Too heavy. The idol you ground to dust and scattered in the fjord. The maiden you sent home with 5 goats and a letter. Marry the fisherman. He's safer. The council began to fear you because you didn't shout, didn't threaten. You just watched. Waited. You let them talk, and they filled the silence with guilt. You started carrying your sword everywhere. Not for protection, for punctuation. Once you walked into the feast hall in silence. Didn't sit, just walked to the head table, placed your sword on the wood, and left. The next day, 2 would-be conspirators confessed to crimes you didn't know about. You punished neither. Publicly. But their lands suddenly produced no grain. And their mead turned to vinegar. Still, some did not learn. They believed the quiet king was a passive king. And so, one night, you received a message carved into the belly of a dead boar left on your doorstep. Blood will take the throne back. You read it, ate the boar, and invited the author to a private dinner. He never left. No. Stories were sung of these deeds. No skalds etched your silence into song. That was the point. A king who kills with fire becomes legend. A king who kills with calm becomes myth. You began to sleep less. The silence crawled under your skin. Not fear, vigilance. You stopped dreaming of wolves. You started dreaming of footsteps. You took to walking the halls at night barefoot, blade in hand, cloak dragging behind. Like a shadow too tired to keep up. Some nights you listened at doors. Not for secrets, just for breathing. To remember who was still alive. One evening, you found the blacksmith's daughter crying by the boathouse. She'd lost her ring in the ice. Knelt, fished it out, said nothing. The next day, her father reforged her sword without asking. He added nothing, removed nothing, just made it quieter when drawn. That was the fifth lesson of kingship. Never raise your voice. Let the world lean in. Asterisk, asterisk. It came early, the cold. Not the kind that nips at fingers or fogs your breath, but the kind that settles into your soul. Like grief that never speaks, by mid-autumn. The fjords froze over. The fishermen pulled in empty nets. The forests went silent. No birdsong, no deer prints, just ice. And waiting, and waiting. In the north is dangerous, It turns men inward, turns patience into suspicion, that turns hunger into prayer, And when prayer doesn't, work into blame. They said it was punishment. That the gods were angry, at you. A king with no queen. A king who rebuilt homes instead of burning them. A king who whispered when he should have roared. Whispers spread like frost on a doorframe. Some claimed you defended Thor by sparing a Christian village. Others said the bones beneath your longhouse were restless. One even said your silence had cursed the land, that the gods couldn't hear prayers through it. You said nothing. Instead, you walked. You visited farms frozen over like tombs. Sat with mothers who fed their children broth made of bark. Held the hands of warriors who died not from wounds, but from waiting. And you listened, because sometimes a king's job isn't to fix things, it's to bear them. But not everyone agreed. Jarls began to circle. You could smell it, that sickly sweet scent of ambition, dressed in concern. We must look south for grain. We must raid again. We must return to the old ways. Translation? You are in the way, so you agreed. You called for a raid, a symbolic one, a southern outpost, poorly guarded. Empty in winter, you sent ships. 50 men, led by 3 of the foe. Loudest JARLS. Then you waited. They never returned, not because of war, because the sea took them. The frost cracked their hulls. The wind snapped their masts, and the gods, perhaps, finished the rest. You did not celebrate. You declared a day of mourning. You offered their families land and firewood, and the people wept for once. Not from loss, but from recognition. The king sees us. The snow kept falling. But now, when it did, no one blamed you. They blamed the gods. And somehow, that made it easier. Then came the girl, wrapped in furs, eyes like wet ash, hair knotted with frost. She arrived from the east with a single sled and no name, claimed she had a gift, way to end the winter. You expected madness, but she gave you something else. A story. It was about a king, long ago, who lived in silence, who ruled not with fire, but with waiting, who outlasted every enemy because he refused to strike first. The world forgot him, the story said, but the land never did. You asked if she wrote it. She said no. She heard it. In the snow. That night, you stood outside until your fingers went black. Not from carelessness, not from choice, because you needed to know. Was this winter just weather? Or was it a message? The sky didn't answer, but the people did. They began to sing, not in halls, but while chopping ice, while binding wounds, while burying their dead. They sang about survival. And sometimes about you. Not as a hero, not as a god. As the man who stayed. Asterisk, asterisk. They called her a gift. It should have been your first warning. Nothing freely given in royal circles is ever truly free. She arrived in spring, though winter still clung to the air like morning. Sent by the Jarl of the southernmost isles, a marriage offering, a peace seal, a trap shaped like a woman. Her name was Ingrid. Hair like a thundercloud, voice like dry leaves, a smile carved carefully from absence, and eyes that never blinked. You, Married her dot, of course you did, because kings do not choose wives, they receive them. The wedding was quiet. You insisted dot no horns, no scalds, no feasting pigs or dancing girls, just a circle of stones, a silent priest, and a ring made from melted down spearheads. She said no vows. You didn't mind dot at night. She slept with a dagger under her pillow dot. So did you. You never asked her to stop dot. It was a kind of honesty you respected. She never touched you in front of others dot, never kissed your cheek, never laughed when the warriors cracked jokes dot the jarls whispered. The queen is cold. She plots. She prays to strange gods. But you knew the truth. She wasn't cold. She was watching. And not just them dot, you dot sometimes. She'd disappear for days dot into the woods, the cliffs, the sea caves. She'd return with herbs, with cuts on her palms, with stories dot. Once she brought you a bird skull and said, "It dreamt of you." You didn't ask what the dream was. You already suspected. One night, she spoke while you lay beside her, facing opposite walls. "If I kill you," she said, "they'll crown me queen." You said nothing. "If I don't, they'll kill me." You still said nothing. She rolled over, touched your back. "But if I stay quiet long enough, maybe I'll become something else." You never feared her. Not really. But you never turned your back on her either. Over time, you noticed things dot. The steward stopped limping after she visited. The midwife smiled again after 15 years. The warrior, with burns across his chest, began carving wood. Little mercies, quiet ones, hidden in shadows, left like offerings. She never asked for praise, never wanted songs. She just wanted space to breathe, and maybe someone to not look away. You began to eat together in silence. You'd pass her the salt. She'd pass you the bread. And that was it. A dance of necessity. But dependable dot, then came the storm. A literal one. Lightning split the fjord like a god's. Wrath. Boats shattered dot, cattle drowned dot, and your hall cracked down the center beam. You knelt on the floor, drenched and shaking dot, not from the storm, but from exhaustion dot, from holding everything. And she came dot, no words, just sat beside you, and for the young, first time, leaned on you. The people noticed. They stopped calling her cold. They started calling her still. Still as ice dot, still as moonlight, still as the silence after a prayer. She never gave you children, not for lack of vow, trying dot, not from any fault dot, just dot, 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 fate. You thought that would wound you dot, didn't, because by then you understood. Some legacies are not born. They are built dot in choices, dot in silence, dot in the people you don't destroy. By your 3rd year as king, you began seeing them, not visions, not madness dot, just ghosts. They didn't speak. They didn't scream or rattle chains. They stood. They watched dot in corners of the longhouse, in the fog rolling off the fjord, behind your reflection, in a still basin dot, the wolf, the child who starved, the brother who never returned from the woods. You learned to live with them. You even nodded to them dot, respect, after all, is owed to memory. You thought ruling would make you larger dot. Instead, it hollowed you, piece by piece. Ah, king is not a man. He is a container. He holds grief for those who can't, anger for those who SOULDN, single quotes T dot, hope for those who've forgotten. How dot sometimes. You sat alone in your rebuilt hall and tried to remember. Your mother's face dot, COULDN, single quotes T dot, only remembered the smell of her hands, smoked pine and wool grease. Once, in spring, you helped bury a farm girl. A fever took her fast. Her father dug the hole with fingers blistered raw dot. You took the spade. He said nothing. Later, someone asked why a king would soil his hands. You said, "It's easier to bless the earth if you've touched it." You didn't grow colder. You grew quieter. There's a difference. The people noticed, and they changed. Not all at once. Not like lightning, but like thaw. The warriors sharpened blades without waiting to be told. The women wove more cloaks than ordered. Children stopped running when you passed. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Then came the stranger. Tall, wrapped in black furs. Face hidden behind a weather-cracked mask. He entered your hall in silence. Dropped a pouch of bone dice on your table. Sat. No invitation. Just eyes that burned from within that mask, like coals too proud to die. You said nothing. He rolled the dice. 6 skulls, 1 serpent. He left. No words. That night, the seeress returned. Eyra. Looking older, smaller, as if some part of her had blown away on the wind, and only this husk remained. She whispered, "The old gods are watching, and they do not blink." You asked what the dice meant. She said, 6 losses, 1 betrayal. You asked mine? She said, everyone's. That night, you didn't sleep. You walked the halls, spoke to your ghosts. Waited. Asterisk. You didn't want it. You avoided it. For years, you postponed raids, bartered instead of battled, sent timber and fish where steel once spoke. But war, in the north, isn't a decision. It's a season. It comes regardless. The spark was nothing. A boy from your outpost stolen by raiders. A skirmish over fishing rights turned sour. A sheep, some said. Just one. But in a land where memory is blood and grudges are heirlooms, that sheep might as well have been a king. The news arrived with frost on the messenger's beard. 3 villages burned. Hay, shrine desecrated. A warband flying a black bear sigil. Marching north, you knew the name. Aslak. He'd waited. He'd gathered. He'd watched. And now he returned with fire in his lungs and old songs on his sword. You summoned the council. The elders groaned. The warriors cheered. Some hoped for glory. Some hoped for plunder. You hoped for an alternative, but there wasn't one. You nodded. You ordered the horns. You prepared for the war you had spent your whole reign preventing. The night before you marched, you visited the forest. Alone. To the place where the wolf once whimpered. You knelt. No prayers. Just presence. And you whispered, "I remember." You dressed in leather, not gold. Your blade was the same one from your youth, scarred, blackened, but dependable. The one that knew your story. The one that didn't shine. They met you on the frozen marshes east of the cliffs. Hundreds. Sails like rotted teeth on the horizon. Drums, horns, and Aslak, standing tall atop a warhorse, eyes wide with victory already written on his face. He raised a hand, offered parley. You approached. He smiled. "Little brother," he said, "I see you kept the throne warm." You replied, "Funny, I was just about to say the same." There was no agreement. Of course not. Just the theater of civility. Before the scream, you returned to your men, raised your sword, and said, "No glory, no songs, just survival." It wasn't a battle. It was a storm. Mud swallowed feet. Arrows hissed like curses. Steel screamed. You didn't lead from behind. Were in it. Bloodied. Bruised. Eyes full of nothing but doing. And in the chaos, you found Aslak, or he found you. Your blades met like old friends forced into murder. He was better trained, but you were tired, and tired men don't care. You bled. First. He smiled. You bled second. He faltered. Then silence. You stabbed him, not with rage. With necessity. He fell, and you didn't watch him die. You turned. You continued. When the fog cleared, your banner still stood. Barely. But it stood. Asterisk. You won. That's what they said. That's what they sang. The Skalds called it a triumph, a saga, the vengeance of the mountain. They recited your name with force, hammered it into bone and song and timber. But when you looked into the faces of your warriors, you didn't see victory. You saw emptiness. Exhaustion. Men who returned not with glory, but ghosts in their throats. The cost? Too high to count. You lost your fastest rider to a fever on the return. You lost half your archers to frostbite. You lost a child. Not yours, but someone's. You carried her body, yourself. To the sea. Wrapped in your own cloak. The villagers lined the streets as you rode back into the hall. They cheered, threw flowers. One girl handed you a braid of moss and said, "You're the strongest man in the world." You nodded. But inside, you felt small. Not weak, just finished. Victory, you learned, does not crown you. It hollows you. You sit on the throne after, surrounded by meat, wine, warmth, and you feel colder than ever, because peace built from blood is brittle, and you'd used too much mortar. The hall was rebuilt again, this time with stone beams, reinforced iron nails, new carvings of gods with weeping eyes, not because you feared fire, but because you remembered it. The fire was never the threat. You were. Your queen sat beside you, silent as always. She'd aged 10 winters in one. Her hands no longer touched blades, but the edge never left her fingers. Once, she took your hand beneath the table, held it. Said, "They will forget all this." You looked at her and whispered, "Good." You wrote letters to the far tribes, to islands you'd never visited. You offered no demands. Just invitations. Come see what survived. Most said no. A few said yes. One sent a blade in return. You hung it above the hearth. You walked the village. Again, helped lift beams, shared salt meat. Held crying elders. And at night, you didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because silence now felt like an old friend you didn't know how to let go. They asked if you'd rebuild the fleet. You said no. Let the sails rot, let the oars sleep. For now, that winter, a child asked, "Do kings still bleed?" You knelt, cut your palm, showed him. He touched the blood, said nothing, but smiled. You didn't flinch, not anymore. Years passed. Not quickly, like cold honey poured over stone. You no longer counted winters. You counted faces. The old ones that disappeared from feasts, not the young ones that took their place. With clean tunics and questions in their eyes, they asked you stories. Not of war, not of wolves. Of why. Why you never remarried. Why you never claimed more land. Why you kept your father's broken sword above the hearth. Instead of a new one, you always gave the same answer. Because I remember, you didn't. Name an heir. Not yet. Too early. The land choose. Let the people see who bears weight. Without complaint, let the throne go to the one who survives the silence. Like you did, your queen aged with a quiet dignity. She tended the gardens, the orphans, the injured. She never called herself queen. But when she walked, even the gods stood. Still, on your 60th year, the children sang your name. Not in fear. Not in duty. Not in play. They carved it into tree trunks and fish bones and whispered it into the fjord. King of ice and smoke. Wolf brother, the one who listened. You didn't correct them. Children understand legacy better than poets. The hall became less a throne room and more a hearth. A place people came to breathe. To confess, not to remember. Sometimes you sat all day in silence, just listening to the wind move through the rafters. And it spoke to you in the voice of every ghost you'd ever loved. One night, the blacksmith's daughter came to you, the one whose ring you once returned. She held her own child in her arms now, a boy named after you. She asked if you'd bless him. You said no. You asked If he would, bless you. He laughed, touched your cheek, whispered, "You're not scary." You laughed too, and it echoed through the hall like spring thaw. And still, you waited, not for death, but for completion, for the moment the throne no longer needed you. And one day, it came. You woke, dressed, ate cold bread and fish, and stood outside the longhouse, and felt it, the wind was no longer waiting. You turned, walked inside, and sat in your chair, not as a king, but as a man. Just a man? Asterisk, asterisk, it ends as it began, with silence. But now it's not the silence of fear, or waiting, or betrayal, it's rest. You don't remember falling asleep. Not truly. You remember closing your eyes in the longhouse, fire low, wind whispering through the beams. And then, not waking, no pain, no prophecy, just release, They say your body sat upright for 3 days. Eyes closed, breathing stopped, but still, like you were listening to one last thing. They wrapped you in your old cloak, not a king's robe, the wolf pelt cloak from your youth, the one that still smelled faintly of pine and ash and winter storms. They placed the blackened sword across her chest, and they didn't cry. Remember, the people didn't mourn like they used to. There were no wails, no dramatic gestures, just small, human things. A warrior placed his helmet at your feet. A child left berries by the door. A widow carved your name into driftwood and set it. Afloat, no ships burned, no songs thundered, instead. One voice, a girl by the docks, began to hum. A tune no one recognized, soft, circular, like the sea speaking to itself. And others joined, by nightfall. The entire village was humming, no words, just memory. They buried you behind the longhouse. Not on a mountain, not in a ship, but beneath the roots of the tree where your mother used to sit. And the headstone bore no title, just your name, and beneath it, carved deep. He listened, and somewhere, far beyond the edge of things, a wolf howls once, then stops, satisfied, you were born the son of a Viking king. You died a king of people, not feared, not worshipped, but understood, and in the end, that was enough.